So I'm John Hepburn. I'm Vice President Research International at UBC, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you all to this very, very interesting lecture from one of India's most important voices on the future of his country, Dr. Ramachandra Guha. So I'm very much looking forward to this talk, and I want to start by thanking IDRC and David Malone for making all of this possible, and also the Canada-India Foundation for helping us out with this. So this is the 40th anniversary of the founding of IDRC, which most of you will know as a great partner for universities and researchers working in the area of international development. UBC has had an excellent relationship with IDRC for many years, with one of our strongest connections being very personal. The founding director of the Liu Institute, the late Dr. Ivan Head, was president of IDRC from 1978 to 1991. And during this period, this long period, he set a very high standard of innovation and excellence in supporting scholars and institutions in the Global South to carry out research that they had determined was important to their region. And I should add, coincidentally, that this lecture, because it turned out to be even more popular than we thought it was going to be, it was going to be held at the Liu Institute. We desperately exceeded the capacity of the Liu Institute, so we've moved it to our Asian Center, and thank you all for noticing that we'd moved it and showing up here. Now, because of the international portfolio, and actually because of research, a large part of my job involves traveling to India and trying to understand that country, which has, from repeated visits, become actually my favorite part of the world, I'll confess to all of you. And it's one of the places overseas that I spend most of my time, along with China, the sort of two large countries that those of us in the West try to understand. Now, everybody knows the standard stuff about India, the emerging economic powerhouse and the back office of the world and the land of many religions. But what I love about India is that it's the land of argument. It's a country of enormous cultural diversity, which those of us who aren't as familiar with India don't recognize until you're immersed in India and see how much diversity there is. It's a place that somehow functions in its own idiosyncratic way, in spite of what to outsiders appears to be overwhelming chaos. And I think I always sum up the difference between India and China in the following way, and it's unfair, but I'll say it anyways. In China, you always have to work very hard to get somebody to disagree with you, even if they do. Whereas in India, the challenge is to get them to agree with you, even if they do. So we're going to hear a lot about India, and with much greater clarity than I can tell you about India. But India is a land of great challenge and of contradiction. It's simultaneously a land of rapid economic growth and great wealth, but a third of the population lives on less than $1 a day. And interestingly enough, the World Bank has an even lower standard of poverty, because according to the World Bank, only a quarter of the population lives below the poverty line. So I'm interested in their definition of poverty. It's a country where there are the most exclusive and elite educational institutions in the world, like the IITs, and yet it's also a country where 55% of women are illiterate in, well, that's a 2004 statistic. And it's a country of communal violence, and we've seen that in unfortunate incidents in the past, and yet it's also a country where religions do live and work together quite happily most of the time. So UBC is very interested in India, it's fair to say. We have strong connections with India. It will feature prominently in our international strategy that we're developing, which is part of the Place and Promise strategy. I was in India actually very recently for 2 weeks in February. I'll be back there in the fall. Stephen Toop, the president, will be in India in a few weeks' time actually. And a strategy for India has to involve developing serious partnerships with India, strategic partnerships with India, long-lasting and sustainable partnerships, and not simply sending delegation after delegation to consume the time of Indian government officials. I say this because I was following a small group of 140 people from Quebec, and my friends in the Indian government were all commenting on what just happened to them. So we're committed to that at UBC. We're very interested, I personally, and I think the size of the audience indicates that we more generally are very interested in learning more about India. And to introduce our speaker, who is now going to tell us about this wonderful country and issue some warnings about this wonderful country, I'd like to introduce, briefly I was told, David Malone. And David I first met in India, I believe, at the High Commission in India, actually at his house, the High Commissioner's residence. And David is another great fan of India, great lover of India. He is currently president of the International Development Research Center, IDRC. And as I said, he was Canada's High Commissioner to India immediately before that. And then he told me not to say anything else except that amongst his degrees is a degree from American University of Cairo in Arabic Studies. And he has, of course, many other degrees. David.
Well, thank you very much, John. It's great to be back at UBC. Ramachandra Guha very kindly agreed to help IDRC celebrate our 40th anniversary because we've actually been active that long. Contrary to what you might think from our name, we're not a think tank. We merely fund development research, overwhelmingly in the developing world. And for that reason, in an anniversary year, we wanted to bring one or two very thoughtful people from the developing world to engage Canadians across the country. I'm very proud to say we have a terrific governor of IDRC from our board of directors from UBC, Frida Granot, who is with us today, who is a great scholar and also a great leader in the academic world, and who contributes enormously to IDRC's governance. 25 years ago, 30 years ago, everybody everywhere in the world was fascinated with Korea and the Southeast Asian tigers. And everybody was studying them. What lessons could be learned from Korea and Southeast Asia that could be applied elsewhere? The answer was not a lot, but they were the flavor of the month. Today, a number of countries we think of as emerging economic powers, China, India, Brazil, South Africa, some others, are attracting all of the attention. And there's a burst of enthusiasm for them, which is both entirely commendable, but also requires qualification. And I think Ram will present us with some views on how our enthusiasm for India might be qualified. I adored my time in India unreservedly, and yet I'm occasionally a critic of some of the individuals and things that go on in India. Ramachandra Guha reminded me the other day that he is entirely the product of an Indian education. We're so used to hearing of Indians who have studied all over the world. He studied in the best institutions in India, St. Stephen's College in Delhi, then the Delhi School of Economics, which was experiencing its golden age when he was a student, and finally, one of India's great IITs, which he graduated from with a doctorate in sociology, but it also covered aspects of ecology. He went on to write extensively on all sorts of different topics, until his great recent work, India After Gandhi. He was probably best known amongst Indians for his writing on subjects like cricket, but his book, India After Gandhi, a unique masterpiece, is unputdownable for anybody with any interest at all in other parts of the world. It managed to translate, for those of us who didn't know India well enough, the excitement of its post-independence years And then in the second part of the book explored a number of issues which are extremely relevant and challenging to India today. And perhaps he'll touch on some of those in his talk. Ram, it's a great privilege to introduce you, and I don't want to stand between the audience and you any longer. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John, and thank you, David. This is the last leg of a fascinating but probably far too abbreviated tour of this great and diverse, wonderful country. I've been in Montreal, Ottawa, and Toronto at the invitation of the IDRC and Ambassador Malone. And I'd like to thank the IDRC and Ambassador Malone for giving me this opportunity of not just sharing my views with a cross-section of extremely well-informed audiences, but also of the kind of encounters, planned and accidental encounters that this trip has allowed me to have with a cross-section of Canadians. Ambassador Malone himself is someone who's altogether rare, a diplomat who combines scholarship with humility. There's some diplomats who are scholarly. He's the first diplomat I've actually met who's humble, but so that's an extraordinary combination, and I knew that when I used to meet him in Delhi, and to get to know him, and to get to know his compatriots, and the major cities of Canada has been an extraordinarily enriching experience. And it's appropriate that I come last to UBC because this was the one part of Canada that I did know. In 2004, at the invitation of the distinguished geographer Graham Wynne, I spent a week as the Green Professor at UBC, when I renewed contact with, among other people, the eminent historian of modern India, Harjot Singh Oberoi, who's, I'm proud to say, like Graham Wynne, a friend and a colleague of long standing. And I retained wonderful memories of my week in Vancouver. So it's really nice that I'm back here, and after having seen the other interesting and richly endowed universities of this country. Now, my talk is entitled 10 Reasons Why India Will Not and Should Not Become a Superpower. But before I come to those 10 reasons, I thought in deference to our common colonial heritage, I'll read you an excerpt from what a Scotsman said about India. Dr. Hepburn talked about India's cultural diversity. That, I think, is in many ways the most striking aspect of the Indian nation state, and the most obvious embodiment of that cultural diversity is the Indian rupee note, which has the denomination written in 17 different languages, indeed in 17 different scripts. Now, the Canadians are immeasurably superior to the Americans in being officially and culturally and emphatically bilingual, but you guys are infants compared to us. So it's India as a political experiment. India is unique. It's unique in that never before was a country so large and so diverse, not just in terms of religion, but in terms of faith, dress, ecology, technology. India is the only country where you would find Stone Age hunter-gatherers and the nuclear bomb, for example, to give you a staggering example of what we hold within us. So it's as a political experiment, India is unique because never before and never since will a single nation be constituted out of so many diverse and disparate parts, and never before, and possibly never since, will a country, a vast majority of whose population is illiterate, choose the route of electoral democracy. So as a political experiment, I think India is the most reckless, daring, ambitious political experiment ever conceived by humankind. It's an experiment with great flaws, and I will itemize some of those flaws. But I'd like to, at the outset, flag the extraordinary ambition of trying to constitute India as a single nation state and then trying to run its polity on democratic lines. And in many ways, the most remarkable tribute to this idea of India was offered by a Scotsman. His name was J.B.S. Haldane. Some of you will know him as one of the greatest biologists of the 20th century. I'm sure his work is still taught in some courses in this university. But Haldane was that very unusual and atypical scientist who, late in life, decided to leave a comfortable and secure academic career in the West for a leap in the darkness, for a new career in India, which was young, independent, conflict-ridden, poor. Now, the UBC, like many other universities in North America and Europe, has been witness and has been a beneficiary of a different kind of migration, whereby young, gifted, talented scientists from the East make their home in the West. But here is Haldane doing the reverse transition, which is again probably quite special. And when Haldane left his chair in University College London in 1956 to move to become a professor at the Indian Statistical Institute in Calcutta, he was asked why he took this rather crazy and uncharacteristic step. And he gave various answers. Haldane was he was a brilliant, angular, cantankerous kind of man. And so he gave different answers. He told one journalist that the Suez Canal had just been invaded by the British and the French, and he didn't want to live in this imperialist country. He told another journalist that Jawaharlal Nehru was a more appealing statesman than Anthony Eden, as indeed he was. And then he told a third journalist who asked him why he was leaving the pinnacle of British university life to go to a poor and half-starved country. He said, 60 years in socks are enough. So anyway, Haldane moves to India in 1956. And he joins the Indian Statistical Institute, starts experimenting on new strains of rice, among other things, learns Sanskrit, becomes a vegetarian, wears Indian food, and is fast-tracked on the route to Indian citizenship. It was a great privilege for us to have Haldane. I mean, an ordinary Scotsman who tries to become an Indian citizen today, as David Malone knows, it may take him 20 years. But Haldane became an Indian citizen very quickly. But he continued to contribute productively and creatively to scholarly research. 3 years after he moved to India, there was a profile of Haldane in an American science magazine, where the reporter described him as a citizen of the world. Now, there are lots of people in this room, myself included, who would be rather chuffed and pleased if someone called us a citizen of the world. We would think that this is a tribute to our ability to transcend narrow-mindedness, parochialism, to have empathy and contact with all of humanity and so on. But Haldane, true to type, was irritated by this description. And he shot off a letter to this American journalist saying, "No doubt," and I'm quoting from that letter, he said, "no doubt I am in some sense a citizen of the world. But I believe with Thomas Jefferson that one of the chief duties of a citizen is to be a nuisance to the government of his state. As there is no world state, I cannot do this. On the other hand, I can be and am a nuisance to the government of India, which has the merit of permitting a good deal of criticism, although it reacts to it rather slowly." Now, this is 1960. I can tell you in 2010, that is precisely my experience. That the government of India has, unlike the government of China, to take your point, sir, has the merit of permitting a good deal of criticism, but it reacts to it rather slowly, if at all. But then Haldane continues, "I also happen to be proud of being a citizen of India, which is a lot more diverse than Europe, let alone the USA, USSR or China, and thus a better model for a possible world organization. It may, of course, break up, but it is a wonderful experiment. So I want to be labeled a citizen of India. Shortly after this, in an article that Haldane wrote himself, he described his new homeland, India, as the closest approximation to the free world. Now, this is 1961, the height of the Cold War, the Cuban Missile Crisis, and to think that a country that was equidistant or non-aligned between the Soviet Union and the United States had the cheek to call itself the closest approximation to the free world, and this appellation coming from a naturalized Indian, J.B.S. Haldane, was something that was stuck in the gulls of Haldane's scientific colleagues, one of whom, a professor of biology at the University of California, Berkeley, wrote to Haldane saying, "You call India the closest approximation to the free world, but my impression is that India has its fair share of scoundrels and a tremendous amount of poor, unthinking, and disgustingly subservient individuals who are not attractive." To this chastisement by a scientific colleague, Haldane replied, "Perhaps one is freer to be a scoundrel in India than elsewhere. The disgusting subservience of the others has its limits. The people of India, people of Calcutta, because Haldane then lived in Calcutta, the people of Calcutta riot, upset trams, and refuse to obey police regulations in a manner which would have delighted Jefferson. I don't think their activities are very efficient, but that is not the question at issue." Now, these are two comments from unpublished letters of Haldane, written in the late 50s and early 60s, which to me still capture, with the economy and wit of a polymathic sort of insider-outsider figure, what the Indian political experiment is all about. It is extraordinary. It is in its scale, in its ambition, in its recklessness. So when you come to hear the words of criticism and chastisement that you're going to hear from me, I'd like you to keep in mind that they come from someone who is an Indian patriot, who is a citizen of India, not a citizen of the world, and who speaks his mind freely in his own country, who thinks that the Indian experiment of unity with diversity and democracy despite poverty was unprecedented, was founded on a quite distinctive and special set of characteristics. National experiments throughout the modern world have generally involved the people of a certain circumscribed territory coming together under a common flag, speaking the same language, adhering to the same faith, and having a common enemy. There are many examples across the world. I mean, to be Polish historically meant you were a member of the Catholic Church, you spoke the Polish language, and you detested either Germany or Russia, depending on which big power was persecuting you at that time. And that's true of that's true of, for example, India's neighbor Pakistan. To be Pakistani means that Urdu historically was the language of Urdu was meant to unite you. You were founded as a Muslim homeland, and you detested India. But the extraordinary thing about the Indian national experiment was that it did not privilege a single language, it did not privilege a single religion, and indeed, it was founded on opposition to the empire, but in many ways, respect and admiration for the British. I mean, I've said this before, and I'd like to say it again, that in the history of relations between empires and colonies, the relationship between India and Britain is unique. Never before has a relationship been so harmonious. I mean, think of the French and the Algerians and the Indonesians and the Dutch and the Belgians and the Congolese and the Americans and the Vietnamese, and you get a sense of, how special this relationship is. It's quite extraordinary that Mahatma Gandhi, the leader of the Indian freedom struggle, counted as his closest friend throughout the period he was fighting for India's independence. He counted as his closest friend an English Anglican priest called Charles Freer Andrews. So the Indian experiment is quite special, and it continues to be quite special. But because of its scale, its ambition, its recklessness, it's also flawed, it's unfulfilled, it's in the process of making, and it's facing a series of challenges. And I'm going to list before you what I see as the 10 major challenges that the Republic of India faces today. They're in not necessarily in order of importance, and I wouldn't like to, I could, when if pushed to it, rank them in order of importance, but I think these are all serious and major challenges that the Republic of India faces, that the Indian political experiment faces. And I'm going to begin with a challenge that has been much in the news in India over the last several weeks, but is rather unrecognized outside. And that's the challenge of a left-wing Maoist insurgency in the heart of India. I live in Bangalore, which when I was growing up there in the 1960s was a charming cantonment town with a glorious Mediterranean climate and tree-lined avenues and parks, and known as the pensioners' paradise. And little did I think when I was growing up in Bangalore in the 1960s and 70s that a time would come when my hometown would be invoked in pejorative terms in an American presidential election, when democratic political candidates would talk about, warn darkly about jobs being Bangalored. So Bangalore is, as you know, a kind of a metaphor for India's rising economy. It's the showpiece of its information technology industry. Dr. Hepburn mentioned the back office of the world, and Bangalore has pretensions to being the back office of the world. So Bangalore is the economic showpiece of India. Delhi is the political capital. It's a place, as David Malone well knows, of great charm and architectural attraction. It's home to possibly the most creative minds in India, the most influential and productive thinkers, writers, artists, not scientists, but thinkers, writers, artists live in Delhi. It's the center of our media, our publishing house. And it's also a city that has very eagerly embraced this idea that India is about to achieve superstardom. There's a great amount of self-congratulation among Delhi's elite. And there's also a fair amount of self-congratulation among Bangalore's elite, which is a business elite as contrasted to Delhi's political elite. Now, if you fly from the political capital of India to the economic showpiece of India, a journey that takes about 2 hours and 20 minutes, about half the time it took me to fly from Toronto to Vancouver today, but unlike the journey I took today, if you were to fly from Delhi to Bangalore, 35,000 feet below you on the ground, hidden from your eyes, hidden from the eyes of the Western media, hidden from the eyes of even the upmarket Indian media and the growing middle class, is a brutal civil war being played out between the forces of the Indian state and Maoist insurgents. This Maoist insurgency, which originated in the late 60s, has experienced various ups and downs, has really consolidated itself in the last 5 or 6 years when the major factions united. You know, there's a famous old joke about Trotskyists, a variety of Marxists, and that joke goes, one Trotskyist is a branch, 2 Trotskyists are a party, 3 Trotskyists are a split. And the Indian Maoists, for much of their existence, were notoriously sectarian and disputatious. I mean, when I was a student in Calcutta in the early 1980s, there were 18 Maoist factions, all quarreling with each other about all kinds of arcane things. There was the anti-Lin Peng, pro-Mao Zedong, anti-Chow Enlai, pro-cultural revolution faction, and various kinds of permutations. And the most disputatious and sectarian faction of them all called itself in true Orwellian style party unity. I mean, it was the most abusive of all the factions. And I used to laugh and I used to have fun. And I wrote a kind of jokey essay based on my years in Calcutta in the 1980s called An Anthropologist Among the Marxists, which is sort of about how I was an anthropologist studying this tribe with its peculiar rituals and hunting practices and human sacrifices and so on. But it's no longer a joking matter. Those different factions united in 2004, and over the last 7 years have steadily expanded their reach across large parts of central and eastern India. And the rise of the Maoists has as its basis the dispossession and deprivation of India's tribal people. About 8% of India is tribal, which is about 90 million people. They live across a wide swathe of hill and forest in the center of the Indian peninsula. They live amidst India's best forests, along its fastest flowing rivers, and atop its richest mineral resources. And over the last 150 years, they have steadily had to make way for the growing urban industrial economy. It started with the British, who exploited the forests of the tribal area for building railways, for shipping materials for the two world wars. It carried on in the early years of independence when, under a regime of state planning, the government built massive hydroelectric projects, of which the main sufferers were the tribals, who lost their lands and their homes and their villages and their shrines and the associations. And it's continued in the 1990s and beyond, when India has embraced an outward-looking economic policy, which has its positive spin-offs, as in Bangalore, where globalization has used skilled capital and generated huge amounts of wealth and philanthropy, but which has also had this outward-looking Indian economic policy has also had rather brutal effects in the tribal homelands, where globalization has meant a massive surge in the exploitation of bauxite and iron ore, where tribals who have uncertain titles to their land have been shafted off by unscrupulous and corrupt politicians working in league with Indian and foreign mining companies. And it's this cumulative process of dispossession, of which I've given you a bare capsule summary, which I've written about at length elsewhere, which is at the root of the Maoist insurgency. Indian democracy has had room for subaltern or underprivileged classes. I mean, the Dalits or former untouchables are fairly well represented in the Indian political system. They are still exploited, they are still brutalized, but they have a voice in the constitutional democratic system. The chief minister of India's largest state is a Dalit woman, which is, who has overcome double disadvantage of caste and gender. The Muslims, who are a minority, who are largely poor, unskilled, who do face discrimination, also have had their concerns and their sufferings and their grievances addressed by political parties working within the democratic system. But the tribals are voiceless, and economic deprivation combined with political voicelessness has delivered them into the hands of the Maoists. And this civil war is very serious. 4 days ago, the Maoists killed 72 policemen in what was the largest such attack in the history of independent India. Some state governments have responded by promoting vigilante groups, setting one group of tribals against another. In one district I visited in 2006, the district of Dantewara in the state of Chhattisgarh, almost 100,000 people had been displaced because of this civil war. So that's the first major challenge facing the Republic of India, a serious Maoist insurgency, which at least in the short term will not go away, and which over the next 10 or 15 years will claim tens of thousands of lives. The second serious challenge is from the right. If you look at the evolution of liberal democracies in Europe, particularly in the interwar period, you find that democracy in Europe had to hold its ground. The liberal center had to hold its ground against Bolshevism or radical communism on the left and fascism on the right. Now, we don't have a full-grown fascist party, at least not yet, fortunately. We have what may be called quasi-fascist, proto-fascist, fascist light party perhaps, known as the Bharatiya Janata Party, which has its roots in a kind of a volunteer organization called the RSS, which was started in the 1920s to make Indian men macho, virile, physical, take up arms, preferably against Muslims and Christians and other minorities. The leaders of the RSS were admirers of Mussolini and Hitler, though that's a fact which they now seek to suppress and disavow. The BJP, which is the political manifestation of right-wing radical Hinduism, was in power in New Delhi between 1998 and 2004. It and its associated organizations are primarily responsible for the communal riots you mentioned, which have peppered the history of independent India, particularly from the 1980s onwards. Now, this was a challenge that India was bound to face, because when India became independent in 1947, it was divided at birth into the state of Pakistan, where faith was explicitly married with state. Pakistan was a Muslim homeland, where those who were not Muslims were effectively not first-class citizens. And hence, there was continual pressure and provocation on the political leadership in India to mimic the methods and legal structures and philosophy and ideology of Pakistan, and to construct India as a Hindu state. Now, fortunately, India's first Prime Minister, Jawaharlal Nehru, who was greatly inspired by Gandhi, his master Gandhi, was determined not to follow this line. And he and his colleagues in the late 1940s and 1950s constructed the basis of a multi-religious secular state in India. But this multi-religious secular state in India was always vulnerable and fragile, and it continues to be so. So you had, after Nehru's death in 1964, you had a burst of Hindu-Muslim rioting, partly caused by internal factors, partly caused by the persecution of Hindus in East Pakistan. In the 1980s, as many of you know, there was a dispute over in a small town in northern India called Ayodhya, where there's a mosque which radical Hindus claimed had been built on the site of a temple dedicated to the Lord Ram, and that dispute sort of spilled over into the streets and towns of north and western India. And between 1985 and 2002, which was the last major communal riot in India, that dispute must have claimed, I mean, no one has really can add up the statistics, but my estimate would be that dispute would have claimed more than 100,000 lives, rendered homeless more than 2 or 3 million people, and completely poisoned the political and social and moral atmosphere of India. Now, after the Gujarat riots of 2002, it appears that the right-wing religious fundamentalism is on the retreat. But this appearance should not lead to complacency. For one thing, if there is political instability or economic recession, it could come back again. For another thing, there is the provocation of Islamic radicalism, which exists. India has been subject to many terror attacks, which by Islamic fundamentalists, of which Bombay in 2008 was only the last. So there's a threat from the left, there's a threat from the right. Now, as it happens, in the first years of Indian independence, India faced similar kinds of threat. Gandhi was murdered 6 months after independence by a Hindu fanatic, but because of Nehru and Patel, who was then Home Minister and Deputy Prime Minister, and a group of very committed secular intellectuals and politicians in office, Hindu fundamentalism was kept at bay. 6 weeks after Gandhi died, the Communist Party of India, acting at the behest of their Soviet masters, launched an armed insurrection against the Indian state. An insurrection that took 2.5 years to quell. So at its birth, in its infancy, facing an extraordinary crisis, India was born against a background of privation, religious rioting, 10 million refugees had to be resettled, 500 princely states had to be integrated one by one. Against this background, you had a fragile, vulnerable center threatened, apart from poverty and illiteracy and all the other problems, threatened by a communist insurgency on the left and a right-wing Hindu assertion on the right. And these threats were met. They were contained, they were tamed by a highly committed and courageous group of public officials who persuaded the extremists to abandon their arms, to enter the democratic process. They forged, the Indian government forged a democratic constitution in 1950. It forged an independent foreign policy. And when the first elections were held in January 1952, the communists had come over ground and contested the elections. And on the right-wing Hindus had also formed their own political party, the Jansangh, which is a precursor to today's BJP, and at least and had abandoned the rhetoric of violence and extremism. So India today faces a similar kind of situation. In 2010, as in 1949 and 1950, the democratic center is threatened by forces, extremist forces of left and right. But there is one significant difference. The center in 1948, 49, 50 held. Will it hold now? The center today is corrupt and corroded. There are no modern equivalents of Jawaharlal Nehru, Vallabhbhai Patel, B.R. Ambedkar, who was the great untouchable leader who framed the Indian constitution, another very important figure in the making of democratic and independent India. There are no comparable uniters and nation builders in the democratic center. On the other hand, the center is corrupt and corroded. And the most striking manifestation of the corrosion of the democratic center, the weakness, the vulnerability, the lack of will of the democratic center is the conversion of political parties into family firms. This is true, of course, most obviously of the Indian National Congress, which has a great history, a party that is going to celebrate its 125th anniversary this year, one of the great political parties of the modern world, which created this new template of nationalism that I talked about, that brought into being democratic Republican India, that inspired other political parties of great influence, such as the African National Congress, which took its name and its ideology and its whole idea of a rainbow coalition from the Indian National Congress. The Indian National Congress today, a once great party, is a family firm. The leadership passes from father to widow to son, and that's true also of other levels in the in the political party. I was at another university in Canada, which recently had visits from 3 ministers of the Congress Party, who were all sons of previous ministers. Now, so it's much the kind of influence of family and kinship is much wider than that of the Nehru Gandhis. It also permeates other parties. In the Punjab, the Akali Dal, which had a fairly honorable history, which Professor Hajjot Oberoi knows much better than me, but which arose in the 1920s as a progressive democratic movement against a corrupt Sikh clergy. That's been converted into the property of one family, the Badals. Go to the south of India, in the state of Tamil Nadu, the DMK, which again had a fairly honorable lineage, which, for example, had extremely progressive ideas on gender equality. That too is now the captive of a single party. And this is, I think, it's a challenge. I wouldn't call it a threat, but it's certainly a challenge, because political parties are open secular institutions. They should be open to anyone to enter, anyone to rise to the top. And if the major political party in India has set this pernicious example, which has been eagerly followed by many other parties, I think it doesn't really bode well for the health of Indian democracy. Along with the decline of the political party is the decline of public institutions in general. The civil services, the police, the judiciary, the universities. In my lifetime, I have seen these institutions decline in efficiency and capability, largely because of 2 or 3 things. Firstly, the increasing influence of kin and nepotism and caste and community on recruitment, on promotion, and on political interference. In Nehru's time, the civil service was autonomous from political interference. So you had independent, efficient political civil service, which would choose and allocate responsibilities from within. From the 1970s, politicians decided that they must have civil servants and departmental secretaries who are personally loyal to them. And that is kind of continued. And this loyalty could be because you've worked with someone for a long time, it could be because you speak the same language, because you've come from the same kin group, and so on and so forth. There's also, of course, as you know, a great deal of straightforward corruption in the public sector. Now, the decline of the political party, the decline of public institutions is partly responsible for one of the problems you mentioned, sir, the growing gap between the rich and the poor. The most spectacular manifestation of this growing gap between the rich and the poor in modern India is a house that is coming up on Altamount Road in Mumbai. It's a house that is being built for a single nuclear family the size of mine. Husband, wife, son, daughter. That's the size of my family. I live in a very nice house in Bangalore. It's about 2,500 square feet. It has space for my study. Each of my children has a room. It's rather privileged by Indian standards. However, this other nuclear family in Mumbai is building a house for its 4 members, which is 27 stories high and 400,000 square feet in extent. I think it's got 4 floors of parking, 3 floors of private cinema viewing, maybe 2 floors of swimming pools, I don't know what else, and maybe 500 rooms for servants. I'm not sure, but this is the most spectacular manifestation, but it's not the only manifestation. I mean, there's a kind of a society in which between 1/3 and 1/4 of the population lives below the poverty line, and yet has some of the richest people in the world. There's something wrong. I mean, there's something that's not completely okay. I mean, I'm not a socialist. I don't believe in radical equality of result. I believe, however, that the state must do what it can to create at least equality of opportunity, to make sure that people, regardless of the home in which they're born, that they have the same life chances, they can go to decent schools, decent hospitals, have access to decent health care, have dignified employment. And I also believe in some kind of in a society in which, as Gandhi famously said, the capitalist acts as a trustee. Now, there are some exceptions. In my hometown, Bangalore, fortunately, the prosperous and successful industrialists are not as extraordinarily vulgar as this. I'll give you an illustration about this. I'll carry on with this example, if I may, and I don't want to single out this, or maybe I do want to single out this Mumbai industrialist. But let me, by way of illustration, let me tell you my experience about this. There was a group from the Brookings Institution visiting India, and I spoke to them, like I'm speaking to you, and I mentioned this place. And afterwards, one of the members, whose name I forget, was appalled by this. He said, I didn't know this, and he said he happened to be, he was a Dutchman. He was the former chairman and CEO of Unilever, one of the world's great companies, so a man of some considerable wealth himself. And he said, you know, this person who's building this house, this 27-story house, in a city in which 40% of the population live in slums, 60% do not have access to clean water and to healthcare and so on. He said, this guy is telling the rest of Bombay, up yours. Now, this is what this Dutchman, former head of Unilever, you know, not a Dutch socialist, you know, not an extremist Marxist, told me. And I was relating this to a friend who works in the Indian private sector. And I said, you know, this is what this person said. He said, oh, he's a Calvinist. You know, he'll think like this. If this guy, if you know, this Mumbai industrialist has made his money, why can't he spend it? So the Dutchman's alarm was treated with contempt. So there's a kind of brashness and vulgarity among the Indian middle class, which is very widespread. It is not one family, one individualist, one industrialist, and so on. And there's this stark poverty on the other hand. So that's challenge number 5 that the Republic of India faces. Challenge number 6 is the rapid pace of environmental degradation. And I'm not talking climate change here. I mean, what India's position should be in global climate change negotiations. Is it a spoiler or is it a crusader for justice? I'm not going to debate that. But I'm going to talk about the condition of the domestic environment in India. The fact that the rates of air pollution in Indian cities are among the highest in the world, the fact that most of our major rivers are dead, the fact that because of very short-sighted populist agricultural policies, there's a massive depletion of groundwater aquifers across India, the fact that there's serious problems with the disposal of chemical waste and nuclear waste. Since I'm speaking in Canada, I should mention that too. There are manifold kinds of environmental problems in India which adversely affect the health, the livelihood, the subsistence, the survival of hundreds of millions of Indians, and at a daily ongoing level, and threaten, certainly imperil, the prospects for sustainable economic growth in India. And I think that's what Indians should be concerned about. Not really much more than climate change. They should be concerned about the state of India's domestic environment, whether it be water, forests, biodiversity, toxic waste, soil condition, and so on and so forth. Now, as I understand it, extreme inequalities and rapid environmental degradation are problems or challenges the market really can't handle. Now, I think I've already made it clear that I'm not a socialist. I think that the market is very important in India for creating jobs, for generating wealth, for unleashing a wave of innovation and dynamism, which it can and must do. But an unchecked market will perpetuate extreme inequalities, and it's perfectly rational for the capitalists to pollute the environment too. So I don't think the market really has a long-term solution for sustainable, rational environmental management. So clearly there are other actors that have to come in to moderate excessive inequality and to promote or to nudge the society and the state towards more sustainable environmental policies. Who are these actors? The state, citizens groups, and the media. And the Indian media, which historically played a very important and crucial role in nurturing a sense of Indian nationalism, in furthering the ideals of Indian democracy, has played a somewhat less than optimum role here. I must be the only columnist in the Indian media who has mentioned that house in Mumbai. With one partial exception, I remember a television program where a heritage architect or an architect with a professed interest in heritage came on the show and said that this would add to the heritage value of the Mumbai skyline. So there are exceptions. I mean, one very brave and pioneering Indian journalist is a man called P. Sainath, who writes for the Hindu newspaper and for many years has written extensively and sensitively on rural deprivation and agrarian distress. But on the whole, the Indian media is completely complicit in this worship of wealth, celebrity, and superstardom. It's also something I am perhaps more distressed about because of my own past work in the environmental field. It's also abandoned its commitment to serious environmental reportage. The Indian environmental movement started in the early 1970s, and unlike in the West, it was not a middle-class movement. It was not people concerned about disappearing fish species or declining redwood stocks. It was a movement of peasants concerned about subsistence and survival issues. And these concerns of peasants and tribals seeking to protect their forests and their fish resources and their water and so on were articulated and theorized by a group of journalists. Preeminent among them was a remarkable man who lived much of his life in Delhi, called Anil Agarwal, who founded the State of India, who founded the Center for Science and Environment, which started publishing in the early 1980s the state citizens' reports on India's environment. And his model was completely taken over, in a pre-intellectual property right regime by the World Watch Institute in Washington. We started publishing the State of the World reports, with exactly modeled on Agarwal's scheme. So you had chapters on the state of forest, state of water, state of pollution, and so on. And Agarwal drew on the work of many other committed Indian journalists. I mean, the Bhopal gas tragedy of 1984 was really brought to wider attention by a quite remarkable journalist writing in Hindi called Rajkumar Keswani. The decline of biodiversity in the Western Ghats was brought to wider attention by a journalist writing in Kannada called Nagesh Hegde. So India had a very honorable and distinguished tradition of environmental journalists writing in the 70s and 80s, who documented very sympathetically, sensitively, and rigorously the impact of unchecked industrialization and economic development on natural resources, and the impact this was having, the negative impact this was having on the livelihood of peasant and tribal communities. And I may say so, that the field of environmental social science in India, I spent nearly 20 years working on environmental sociology and history, and had it not been for these journalists, neither me nor other sociologists and historians and economists would have really focused attention on environmental questions. That tradition has disappeared. Unfortunately, economic thinking in India worked from one extreme to the other. So state control of the economy was too rigorous, too excessive, and then we moved to a free market regime, which has spawned a new kind of press, where the newspapers who had environmental journalists on their rolls have either laid them off or redesignated them as stock market correspondents. So the Indian press has played a less than honorable role in both moderating inequality and in focusing attention on rampant environmental degradation. Another challenge that the Republic of India faces today is political fragmentation. Now, part of this is a response to India's diversity. India is too large, too complex, too variegated, ever to be run by a single party or even by a stable two-party system. So you have a proliferation of parties seeking to represent suppressed voices, low castes, minority linguistic groups, regions, far-flung regions, backward regions, and so on. So you have a multiplicity of parties. But this democratic upsurge has had less than rational effects when it comes to policy making. So, for example, when a national government has to be formed in Delhi, no single party can come anywhere near a majority. So to rule, the Congress party needs the support of 8 or 10 smaller parties. And as a price of support, those smaller parties ask for the most profitable ministries. So multi-party coalitions in India are a constraint against rational, far-sighted policy making, but they are also an incentive to rent-seeking and corruption. The penultimate problem facing the Republic of India today are what I call the unreconciled borderlands. In my book, India After Gandhi, I say that India is about 50% democratic and 80% united. I've talked about the 50% democratic so far. I mean, I've talked about the decline of public institutions, the conversion of political parties into family firms, the tendency to use violent means by radicals of left and right, and so on. But let me talk about 80% united. 80% is actually quite staggering. I mean, when India was born, and through the 50s and 60s, no one expected India to hold together as a single nation, because of this extraordinary diversity. It was confidently predicted it would break up into 8 or 10 or 15 parts. But there some threats remain. India is a union of 28 states. The citizens of 25 states are more or less reconciled to being Indian, and in some ways more than reconciled. They are happy to affirm themselves as Indian. Because of this promotion of linguistic and religious diversity, they are quite comfortable with being Indian. But 3 states are unreconciled. One is Kashmir, or one part of Kashmir, the Valley of Kashmir, which is only one part of Kashmir, which is a disputed territory over which India and Pakistan have fought 3 wars, and where the citizens are deeply discontented because of many complicated reasons, one of which is repression by the Indian state. Then you have the Kashmir problem is well known and well covered all over the world, partly because India and Pakistan both have nuclear arms. But then in the northeast, you have two less known insurgencies in Nagaland and Manipur, where again, if a referendum was to be taken, probably a majority of the citizens of those two admittedly small states would want a separate homeland. So you have the unreconciled borderlands. And then finally, you have an extremely unstable neighborhood. We are not speaking Canada here. I mean, Canada has the cold but peaceful Arctic to the north, and this large complicated country to the south of you, about which I'm sure you have many ambivalent feelings. Some of you may love it, some of you may detest it, but all of you know that it's not going to invade you or send terrorists into your territory. So Canada, the situation of Canada in this respect could not be more opposed to that of India. India lives in one of the most unstable neighborhoods in the world. To our west is Pakistan, which has rightly been called the most dangerous country in the world, which could implode at any moment, which has consistently aided and abetted terrorist attacks on India. To our east, we have Bangladesh, which is at the moment undergoing quite stable, and I think one should be cautiously hopeful about Bangladesh because it has a very active civil society movement. It has a very moderate form of Islam, a form of Islam which is, in my view, at least among the political party ruling Bangladesh today, a form of Islam that is compatible with cultural pluralism and with democracy. But on the other hand, one shouldn't be too sanguine either, because Bangladesh has had long periods of military rule. It's also been a breeding ground for terrorism. To our south, we have Sri Lanka, which has come through a brutal civil war in which nearly 100,000 people died. And believe me, the problems between Tamils and Sinhalas have not ended yet. To our east, there is Nepal, where there was a massive Maoist insurgency, which several years ago abandoned arms, but we're not sure whether this is temporary or permanent. Certainly, it hasn't. The Maoists haven't really acquired a soft landing in the Nepali constitutional process yet. So what I've done is I've outlined to you 10 challenges India faces, and I'll list them again. There are 10 reasons India will not become a superpower. First, the serious and apparently intractable challenge of left-wing Maoist insurgency. Second, the currently recessive but ever-present danger of right-wing religious fundamentalism. Third, the decline and the corruption of the democratic center, and particularly the conversion of political parties into family firms. Fourth, the degradation of public institutions. Fifth, the growing gap between the rich and the poor. Sixth, the rapid pace of environmental degradation. Seventh, the apathy of the media. Eighth, political fragmentation and the policy incoherence it gives rise to. Ninth, the unreconciled borderlands. And 10th, unstable neighborhood. There are 10 reasons that India will not become a superpower, to which I will add the citizens, this is the analysis of the historian, to which I will add the citizens' hope and desire and wish that India must not become a superpower. Sometimes when I make these arguments, there are Indians who give me examples. They say, when America became a superpower, blacks still couldn't vote in the southern United States. When Russia attempted to become a superpower, whatever, there was trouble in the Muslim homelands and there was poverty. But I think, if anything, those should be cautionary tales. I mean, look at what happened to the Soviet Union, and look at what is going to happen to America in the next 20 or 30 years because of overreach. But apart from that, I think India is uniquely placed not to be a superpower, but to be what my colleague Sunil Khilnani calls a bridging power. I think what is really in India's DNA is greater influence in culture, in ideas, in promoting an ethic of democracy and diversity, which other countries can learn from. I mean, countries in Asia and Africa, which are seeking to move towards from authoritarian to democratic regimes. Countries in Europe and North America that are trying to cope with immigration and diversity. Countries in our own region, Sri Lanka, for example. If Sri Lanka had followed the Indian model of multilingualism, there would never have been a civil war. If Sinhala had not been made the sole official language, if Buddhism had not been made the sole official religion, there would not have been a civil war. So I think when I make the argument for India not being a superpower, I am not making it as an isolationist. I mean, on the one hand, it comes from a historian's reality check. I mean, I recognize, based on my studies and my travels across my country, I see and I recognize a series of major challenges that need to be addressed patiently and incrementally and need to be repaired. We are not the attempt to achieve some kind of superstar status, I think, distracts attention from a focus on these challenges. I mean, our Prime Minister, I don't know whether he's still in this continent, but he, the last 7 months, he's visited the United States 3 times. He hasn't visited most of the states of the Indian Union in the 6 years he has been Prime Minister. And the next column I write in the Indian press will be about this. You know, there's firefighting all around. I mean, what a visit by the Prime Minister to the conflict-torn district of Dantewala in central India would do. What a visit by the Prime Minister to Nagaland in the northeast might do. These are questions, but because the Prime Minister, like many of his political colleagues, like many more of the business elite and the Indian media, which is also a great cheerleader for superstardom, thinks that this is where his main emphasis should be. I mean, it's 3 times in 7 months. And I'm not speaking here as an anti-American or as an anti-colonialist, but simply as someone who's drawing attention to the fact that the Prime Minister of a great, far-flung and conflict-ridden republic has not, in 6 years as Prime Minister, visited most of the states. Why doesn't he go to Kashmir? Just think of the message it would send if the Prime Minister went to Kashmir. And again, I'm singling out the Prime Minister like I singled out the Mumbai industrialist simply as an illustration. There are many other influential people in India, in the business sector, in the intellectual sector, in the state sector, whose enchantment with expanding their ambition and reach on the global stage, I think, are undermining our collective hopes of managing these conflicts within. So I think India must not and will not become a superpower. Thank you very much.
My name is Peter DeVerne, Director of the Liu Institute for Global Issues, and I have the privilege of moderating the questions and answers. We have, I think, 5 minutes only, so just 2 or 3 questions, and I see hands leaping up right here and then there. Is there a microphone too? Why don't you go to the microphone? That might be easiest, and then, if you don't mind. Did I take too long?
Thank you for an excellent talk. Thank you for an excellent talk, Dr. Guha. I have 2 questions. Question number 1 is, you mentioned about Calvinism. And me being a student of sociology and being highly influenced by Weber and, you know, Protestant ethic, Calvinism and Protestant Christianity, I was thinking that that gentleman's reaction to, I think it was Ambani's multi-storied building, has any connection to do with Hinduism as a way of life. Of course, Hinduism is a big thing, and it's much complex. And and second question is, like you concluded with your idea that India should not become a superpower. It's not will not, but should not. So does it resonate with what Mahatma Gandhi's way of, you know, viewing India? So did ever Mahatma Gandhi think of India becoming a superpower?
You know, the second question is, unlike Gandhi, I'm not a pacifist. I mean, I admire Gandhi greatly. I think he was the most remarkable individual of modern times. But I'm not a pessimist. I think India needs to be vigilant about its borders. It needs a technically skilled and sophisticated army and navy. It needs to bargain its corner hard in world trade negotiations and so on. So, in that sense, I don't think, I mean, I think Gandhi is very important for domestic politics. Gandhi is important for Hindu-Muslim harmony, for the upliftment of Dalits and women and so on. But I wouldn't want to, my prognosis is not Gandhian really, it comes from what I've studied. But your first point, it is true. I mean, there is some element of Hinduism which is, where large-scale philanthropy doesn't come naturally to Hindu businessmen. I mean, there was a wave of Hindu businessmen who made a lot of money and built temples. They didn't build huge houses, but they built gold-plated temples. The first philanthropists in India, and the only really good philanthropists in India, were not Hindus but Parsis, the Tatas and the Godrejas. But this could change. I mean, I am one who doesn't believe that traditions are immutable. Calvinists can become selfish and Hindus can become selfless. I mean, it's possible. So that's it. Yeah.
Hello, my name is Shantanu Mitra. I'm just an engineer working here. Incidentally, I have your book. I have not managed to finish it. It's so fast, so fat. My question to you is, I was listening recently to a Gandhian activist named Ramachandra Guha, who was working in the tribal belt in the areas that you mentioned, and I believe he's been driven out from there recently. And in his speech, he mentioned your name along with a few others who were apparently appalled at the atrocities, if I might call it, against the tribal people there by this kind of a
vigilante group, yeah.
Vigilante group called
Salwa
Judum. And then you along with others tried to lodge some sort of an official report or complaint against it, and the state or someone apparently branded you a Maoist sympathizer because of that. So can you tell us, it looks like, for instance, Vandana Shiva calls it the greatest land grab since Columbus.
Well, the Maoists call me a running dog of imperialism. So, so that's how the Maoists see me. So I think it's a very complicated scenario. And black and white portrayals are unhelpful. The state has behaved abominably towards tribal people. But the Maoists are no answer. They escalate violence. They treat tribals as cannon fodder. They want to establish a liberated zone from which they will then launch a larger armed struggle. On the specific case you mentioned, the Gandhian activist works in the district of Dantewara, and where 100,000 people are displaced. And there's a case currently before the Supreme Court, of which I am one of 3 petitioners, asking for rehabilitation and restitution. And I'm not hopeful, because I think this is not something that the state government, particularly of Chhattisgarh, is very hostile to the idea. It is very depressing and dark, though. But at the same time, I would like to caution against the romanticization of Maoists as people who really have the interest of the tribals.
I was wondering if you can throw some light on this allegation, or rather this whispers that it's a land grab by the corporates.
What is it?
Which is
Again, that's an exaggeration. That's part of it, but that's an exaggeration. But that's certainly part of it. That's certainly part of it. That it's that mining. I mean, it's like parts of Africa where there's resource curse, where you have rich mining and then you have people using violent means to get to it. I mean, so it's something that the government should be much more sensitive about.
I'm Karthik Pataviram, and I'm a faculty member here. So you talked about 10 reasons why India should not or cannot become a superpower. But it seems like you were also implying that India should not aspire to become a superpower or even dream of becoming a superpower. Now my question to you is, often dreams can galvanize a nation into taking concrete action. Like when President Kennedy said, let's put a man on the moon, 1916, that galvanized a wave of US scientific revolution, the fruits of which are being seen today. But it seems by even not aspiring to become a superpower, you're suggesting that you prematurely squash this dream. So what would you replace that dream by, if not?
Well, the dreams are there. I mean, the dreams of our founders are there. I mean, if you read the writings of Ambedkar or Gandhi or Nehru, as it happens, my next book is an anthology of Indian political thought from Ram Mohan Roy to Jayaprakash Narayan, which tells you, which contains the words and the ideas of the most remarkable Indian thinkers across the political spectrum. No right-wing loonies, no left-wing loonies, but the democratic center. The dreams are there. How to construct a single nation despite this diversity and to do it democratically and peaceably. How to, Hinduism was mentioned, how to convert a religion that practiced the most extreme form of discrimination into one that recognizes the equality, dignity of all human beings. The Indian national experiment is your dream. Come and fulfill it. Honor the ideals that are there in that rupee note, that are there in the Indian constitution. The dream of superstardom is a completely male macho dream. It's my member is bigger than yours. I'm sorry to use this, but that's what it is. So that's not my dream. My dream is. So we have dreams. The dreams are there. The dreams of Gandhi, of Nehru, of Ambedkar, of Phule, of Kamaladevi Chattopadhyay. My book has all these people, and so please read that book, and you will find an alternate set of dreams. So mine is not a despairing, cynical, skeptical, anti-Indian, self-obsessed left-wing critique. I'm just redirecting the attention of Indians to what India really means, which is not, having more weapons, more GDP, more billionaires, more cricket players, more film stars. There's something more and deeper.
Okay, wonderful. These are such fabulous answers. We're going to allow 2 more questions. So one and then one further if somebody wants to go on.
Hello, thank you for your talk first. And so you have, one of the reasons is the gap between the poor and the poor and the richer, which is bigger and bigger. I'd like to ask a question in the middle for the middle class. For the famous rising middle class. Do you think that India will have the ability for demography, economic resources to absorb or incorporate this rising middle class? And if not, what about what will happen to all these frustrating middle class people who will be for example, over-educated or over-qualified? What about this frustration if it's not absorbed or incorporated?
No, that's a very fundamental question. That's a question that is important at various levels. If I understood your question correctly, at one level, it's a question about, which is a global question, whether the earth can sustain, whether the process of economic growth, even if it's successful, even if you have all the tribals becoming middle-class consumers like me, what the global environmental impact would be. That's one aspect of the question. The other aspect of the question is, and this links up to some of the previous comments, is that as the middle class grows, how does it see and conceptualize itself? There's worry among some sections of Indian opinion, a worry I share, that the middle class is walling itself off from the rest of society. So if you go back to the Indian national movement was sustained by the middle class, by an open-minded, democratic, progressive middle class. If you go back to the welfare state in Europe, that's what sustained it. It wasn't the poor who built and the disadvantaged to build the welfare state, but a thinking, conscious, conscientious middle class. So that's the second aspect of it. The third aspect of it, which is probably what you directly mean, is what happens when someone wants to join the middle class and can't. Now, I haven't talked, but that's again a very interesting and important question in India today. One of the aspects, worrying aspects of India today is violence. Of young men. It could be the Maoists are young men between 18 and 30. The religious extremists, Hindu, Muslim, Sikh, Christian, whatever, are young men between 18 and 30. The linguistic chauvinists, the insurgents in the northeast, in Kashmir. There's also a lot of violence conflicted on oneself. I talked about agrarian distress. There's been a wave of farmer suicides in India over the last 15 or 20 years. And I think sociologically we haven't understood this. Because agrarian distress, deprivation, crop failure, indebtedness is endemic to Indian history. Professor Ashok Kotwal knows this much better than me. But in the past, farmers never killed themselves. Why are they killing themselves? They're killing themselves, I think, partly because the media tells them you're a loser. If you're not driving a fancy car, if you're not, in a pub, if you're not, so I think there are various aspects to this middle class question that we still are imperfectly understanding. So what we need, the first question is, can we really build a middle class of 1 billion Indians, or do we have to think, and this is why Gandhi becomes relevant, do we have to think of an alternate model of economic growth? This is much more sensitive to resource endowments. The second question is, the middle class that does exist, how can we make it more sensitive and alert to the problems and challenges within Indian society today? So I think these are very important questions that you've pointed to. Thank you.
And this last question, go ahead.
My name is Tabriz Siddiqui. I'm from the Department of Psychiatry. You mentioned the extremely unstable neighborhoods, and you talked about the budding civil society in Bangladesh. Do you think there is a budding civil society in Pakistan as well, because of what we saw as a lawyers' movement? What can we Indians, or in particular Muslim Indians, do to normalize relations with Pakistan and Bangladesh?
Yeah, I will answer that question, a very important question, except that this is not only an obligation of Muslim Indians, it's on all of us, so I wouldn't want to, say that, it's on all of us. I think there is a civil society in Pakistan, but it's very fragile and small. There's also an outstanding press in Pakistan. In some ways, the press in Pakistan, because over many years of military rule and religious fundamentalism, the press has a voice of, it's like the Indian press under colonialism, It's progressive, it's emancipatory, it's brave. I mean, Pakistani editors are braver than Indian editors. Indian editors want to go to Davos and give speeches. The Pakistani editors are much braver. So that's part of the middle class. That's part of civil society. I mean, the lawyers' movement you mentioned, but it's very fragile. The problem with Pakistan is structural. Pakistan is a problem that has experienced a great deal of bad luck. And it's a long thing. I mean, I don't know, do I have 3 minutes to?
Yes.
Oh, okay. It's a very interesting, complicated, I mean, because people have to be interested in why Pakistan and India are different. The Indian National Congress, which led to the birth of India, was a progressive democratic movement which had middle class people from all over. The Muslim League, which created Pakistan, was the party of landlords and feudal elites, right? Then, when we became independent, we had a visionary leader, Nehru, who could lead us for 17 years. Pakistan had a terrible ill luck that their modern-minded leader, Jinnah, died within a year. Then Pakistan had the further bad luck that they became a frontline state in the Civil War and was seduced into an alliance with America. There's a famous saying that Pakistan has 3 enemies, Allah, Akbar, and America. Right. Now, I think that Indians should think about that. Allah, the army, and America. Allah, the army, and America. Now, Indians should worry. Fortunately, the army is not there. Our version of Allah is Ram. We should keep him at a distance. And America also, we should not really cozy up to too much. We should be careful about that. Then you have had, the Afghanistan conflict. So Pakistan is in a very complex. So my sense is, historically, though I'm a great admirer of the Pakistani middle class, or Pakistani civil society, I visited Pakistan several times. I visited Pakistan 6 weeks after the Mumbai terror attacks. To answer your question, to give a direct personal answer to your question, I got my visa from the Pakistani High Commissioner on the 24th of November. The terrorist attack took place on the 26th of November 2008. I got my visa from him personally. And I can tell you, unless he was a greater actor than Anthony Hopkins, he had no clue about what's happening. So the Pakistani state is not in control over what's going on. And the terror attack happened. I wanted to go to Lahore. I was uncertain, confused. My mother said, don't go. My friend said, don't go. My daughter said, you have to go. My daughter was 15. She said, Appa, this is really an answer to your question. I said, why must I go? And I was myself nervous. I mean, if you go back to living in India during that time, she said, Appa, you must tell them, not all of us hate all of them. And I went, and there were 12 people on the flight. And in Lahore, of course, the hotel staff were all over me because they were so grateful that an Indian had come. But the tragedy in Pakistan is, because of this accumulated baggage and history, civil society is very vulnerable. Indian civil society is much wider and far-flung. Outside sections of Lahore and Karachi, you can't find it. So, however much I admire them, I think they can't really redeem or restore Pakistani democracy.